So last Sunday we ended with Paul's missionary journey, his flying journey through southern Turkey and all the different places he visited. And we ended up with Paul and Barnabas back in Antioch, where they had started. And today we have the story of the Jerusalem Council. If you're looking at your quarterly, it's lesson 3 on page 12. If you're following along in your Bible, it would be in Acts 15, would be the context of this. In order to understand this lesson, I find it difficult to start in verse 13, where our text, our printed text, does. Before we look at this, we want to look at my goal for this lesson is to take a very broad view of what was going on here. There are so many things we could discuss for a very, very long time. Just look at some of the questions here, like number 5. What, or does the church have authority to establish brotherhood agreements today? Okay? That's a very pertinent question. It's one that we could, continually argue about, and we'd probably come out of different places. Number 3, what right did this council in our story have to choose these 4 things that they determined to be important and told the believers at Antioch that they thought was important? What right did they have to choose those 4 things? Okay? Those are fighting words, I think, that's why I put these words up here: conflict, deviance, argument, fight, dispute, and dissension. How do those words make you feel? I want you to think about your perspective on these types of things. How do they make you feel? James?
If I think of it in the church context, it gives me a knot in here.
Okay. A knot in your stomach, okay? Anybody else? How do you feel about these words, Jake?
It's not so much how I feel. I'm referring to a term that we had heard in the past already. If that's the way it is, I'm out of here.
Okay. Very much. Anybody else?
Here's your depressed feelings.
Depression? Yeah. Knot in your stomach? Not here. Okay. One of my goals here, like I said, I want to take a very broad view. We could drill down on specifics in this story, and we could have a very good conversation as well. That's not the direction that I want to go with this lesson. We're very limited with time. But one of my goals is to examine and reflect personally on our beliefs, our values, and our emotions related to conflict and deviance that we experience, okay? Would you all agree that these sorts of things happen, okay? Okay? Yeah. So why is it that we have this knot in our stomach? And I personally don't enjoy conflict at all. Like, if there's another way around it, I'll probably go that way, okay? I will deal with people like coworkers that get on my nerves just by, ignoring them or just like trying not to deal with the issue, even though they might be completely out of order and probably need to be told, how things really should be, right? I tend not to want to do that. I don't even want to go there. Like, I just want to do my thing and let everybody else do theirs and kind of just get along with people. And I avoid that, all right? I avoid these types of situations whenever I can, all right? We also have, why is it that we feel this way? Well, we know verses in the Bible that, like in Proverbs where it talks about only by pride comes dissension, right? Right? So, and we know that pride is sinful. God hates pride, right? So we think, well, are these things sinful, would you say? we're uncomfortable with them, we have a knot in our stomach and we try to run the other way, if that's how it's going to be. But are they sinful? Somebody want to answer that?
Sins of the Spirit.
Sins of the Spirit? Okay. James?
Like the word dispute, that's not necessarily a sinful term.
Okay.
Fighting, getting pretty close to sin there, I would say.
Would you agree that these words all have some commonality, though? Right? They're all kind of in the same group of words, wouldn't you say? Okay. Mark?
I say they could lead to sinful actions
Okay. All
and
right.
attitudes that are.
So do we avoid these types of things because we don't want to sin? Or is it because we just don't like that feeling in the middle of our stomach that they bring us? What do you think? Well, today's story is a story of people, Christians, I should remind you, that did this. Were involved in dispute, dissension, and I always chuckle. Luke, the writer of Acts, had a very kind of a dry, underwhelming or unimpressive way of trying to make things, describe things that were a big deal. Okay, and he used the term like no small something. He did it all the time. So there was no small stir among the people, or something like that, or there was a no small tempest, or whatever. Well, today there was no small dispute. Okay, this was a big deal. Okay, these people, their emotions were high. Okay, this was not just like a, sit down, have a little discussion, and there was strong emotions that were involved in this. I think we tend to look at this story and think that, this was. Well, I guess I should ask, do you think that this story of the Jerusalem Council, from what you know about it, was this an example of good behavior in the Church of God? Or was this an example of people whose emotions got out of control, who were led to sin by what we see they did in their dispute, in their dissension, in their argument, in their fighting? Okay? What would you say? How would you look at this passage? Is this a good example that we should allow to happen? Or some would even argue that we purposely make happen? Or should this kind of situation be avoided because of the badness and the knot in the stomach and the people wanting to just get out of here, all of those things?
Was the Spirit of God in it?
Was he?
I would say he was.
Okay. What makes you think that? Okay. I want you to answer that at some point.
It's established principles that have been guidelines ever since. And there were things that took place at the inception of the church that these were things that were worked through to establish for us how that we should respond to situations even today.
Okay. So do you think that what they did there, the discussion or the dissent that they had, solved the problems for us today so that we shouldn't have these types of situations?
It doesn't take and make that we don't have those situations, but it does give us guidelines as to those things that they were being confronted with at the inception of the church. And so that something that we have to go by even to this day, as I was saying.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on whether this Acts 15 is an example of good behavior on the part of the church, or whether it demonstrates a failure
I think it's an example of good behavior. That's in a time of conflict, in a time of disagreement. I mean, we have to see that the end of it came out well.
Okay.
And you do see in here it says, and the multitude kept silence. So there was respect there to listen to some, your opponent speak. And it says, and when they held their peace, So you see that atmosphere in the audience as well. So you know the Holy Spirit is there.
Okay. Yeah.
Conflict is a normal human situation. It don't matter. You can run out of the church, but you'll run into conflict somewhere.
You don't think it's always an evidence of
No, no. It's not an evidence of
sanctification and-
depravity or something like that. It's normal. But you cannot live in a constant state of conflict. If the church here at Acts would have continued this discussion for a couple months, they would have had a split. So it's a good story in that it came out, there was a bright ending to this story, which is very encouraging for church leaders today.
Any other comment on that? So we tend to look at it as a good story, all right? But remember, I want you to think and examine your own feelings and emotions and your own values related to these types of situations. Okay? What would have happened if Paul and Barnabas would have just avoided this discussion? What would have happened? Okay? So I think we'd probably agree that we're thankful that they chose to pursue this, to make a big deal out of it, okay? Because it was a big deal, all right? And they were willing to put their heart, their brains, and their emotions and their passions into this situation. And they were willing to engage in no small dispute and no small dissension in order about this situation. So, what is the story? Starting in chapter 15, we have several characters. I want you to think about the characters and the conversations that they had. This is kind of how this story is moved forward. In the beginning of chapter 15, we have some men. It doesn't identify who they were. They came from Jerusalem or Judea to Antioch, which was like an outreach of the church. There would have been a big mixture of people there, Gentile converts as well as people that had been brought up in Jewish settings. They came there and they were teaching the brothers or the church. Okay, so these people from Judea, from Jerusalem, which would have been primarily Jewish, that culture, they're coming and they're bringing this message. What is it that they were saying? They were saying, probably in a lot more different ways, but in summary, Luke summarizes it as they were teaching that unless these people are circumcised according to the customs of Moses, they cannot be saved. Okay? That was the message that these people, this unidentified group of men from Judea, were bringing. This brought Paul and Barnabas, and you see there in verse 2, they had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas. And it doesn't tell us how long this went on. It doesn't tell us, it just says that there was a dispute, or Paul and Barnabas disputed with them and were arguing that this was wrong. This teaching that they were bringing was wrong. And it caused quite a bit of stir in this church at Antioch. And so somebody had to decide, what are we going to do about it? Okay? So this was the course of direction they chose. They chose Paul and Barnabas, okay, key leaders in the argument against this teaching, and some others, again, unidentified people from the church at Antioch. They appointed them to go to Jerusalem, to the leaders there, and figure this thing out. Come back and tell us how it should be. Okay, so that's what they did. And they were sent away by the church, verse 3. They traveled down to Judea, down to Jerusalem, and they were welcomed in verse 4 by the church at Jerusalem, by the church and the apostles and the elders, the leaders. So these are the characters in play now. And immediately this issue came up. there were some believers, unidentified people, who belonged to the party of the Pharisees, which I think is interesting because it gives us a clue as to their cultural upbringing and why they felt that this was an important issue. Okay? These were not wicked people wanting to deceive and destroy the church of God. Okay? These were brothers. They were sincere people. They were convinced that what they were teaching was correct. It was important for these Gentile believers to be circumcised and to follow the customs and traditions that Moses had taught them for years. They knew this was important. Okay? This is what they were telling. This is why they traveled all the way from Jerusalem to Antioch to tell these believers this. They believed it was important, right? They were not false teachers. They weren't false prophets. They weren't purposely propagating deception. Okay? I think that's important to understand. And there was immediately an argument with this delegation from Antioch and these other people, stating that it was necessary to circumcise them and in order for them to keep the law of Moses. So, now the argument is in Jerusalem. The apostles and elders gathered together to consider the matter. Okay? And we see again, there was much debate. It doesn't tell us how long this went. It doesn't tell us any of that. It doesn't tell us it was an afternoon. This could have been gone over several months of meetings, you know? It doesn't tell us. Okay? It tells us that there was much debate. We know that the apostles and elders were together. Further down, it indicates that possibly other people of the church, in verse 22, could indicate that, you know, more general church people were involved in this debate as well. But it doesn't identify them. And it doesn't identify all the apostles and elders, but one of them we see, Peter, would have been a prominent leader in Jerusalem. He stood up and he argued in favor or against this group of Pharisees that said they have to be circumcised, and he cited his own testimony and experience where God showed him in a vision that, you know, the vision that came down, or the sheet of unclean animals that came down, and where God compelled him to go against what he felt strongly was wrong, but to reach out to the Roman centurion and Cornelius, and in spite of himself, in spite of his discomfort, and in spite of him having to be forced in kind of a dramatic way to reach out to these Gentile people, Peter was surprised at what happened. And he couldn't argue with the fact that God's Spirit came down onto that group of Gentiles just like it had in his own experience. And he had to accept that this was from God. So he's telling this story to this group of people. And he's saying, look, we have to let them be Gentiles. And, you know, the Word of God Jesus came to save them as well. It's by grace that we're saved through the Lord Jesus, just as the Gentiles will be. All the assembly fell silent at that point in verse 12 as they listened to then Paul and Barnabas, also, you know, very emotional and strong proponents or arguing against this position, how they related their travels and how God did all these signs and wonders and miracles among the Gentiles. They told their story of their missionary journey among the Gentiles, people that weren't raised, you know, to live like they had been, like the Jews had been. And so they told all of that. That was one of their arguments against stating that this teaching was not coming from God. After they had finished speaking, James, this is commonly believed to be the brother of Jesus, who was a prominent leader in Jerusalem as well, among the Jewish church there. He got up and he sort of summarized everything. He quoted from the Old Testament, stating that this actually was prophesied before, that the Gentiles would become part of this new thing that God is doing in the church. And so he then kind of recapped everything and stated his judgment or this is what we need to do. Verse 19, he says, "Therefore my judgment is that we should not trouble these Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them," and here's where they chose what they should tell them, "but should write to them to, one, abstain from things polluted by idols," or from meats offered to idols is one way of looking at that. Some translations translate it like that. "And from sexual immorality," number 2, "and from things that were strangled," verse 3, or number 3, "and from blood." Eating blood. I'm not exactly sure what all that meant. So 4 things. And then he says, because, in verse 21, "For from ancient generations Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he has read every Sabbath in the synagogue." Okay? So that's what they did. This was his judgment on this situation. Okay? Verse 22, "It seemed good to the apostles, the elders, the leadership, as well as the whole church, to choose from their church to send them with Paul and Barnabas to do hand deliver this letter and to explain it to the brothers and sisters in Antioch." So they chose 2 people, Judas and Silas. Judas was probably more from a Jewish heritage, Silas more from a Gentile heritage, which I think is kind of interesting, probably a wise move, probably a deliberate move on their part. And the goal was to bring these people together, okay, not to cause a split, not to have, well, the Jews and the Gentiles are just not compatible culturally, socially. They're just going to, the Jews can just be Christian believers over here, the Gentiles, they can just be Christian believers over here. That never was the perspective here. The perspective was to bring them together and to settle their differences. So they did that. It tells us the actual wording of the letter, which I think is fascinating. Basically recapped everything that John had said to the Jerusalem assembly. So they traveled back up, these 4 men and probably some others, and they delivered the verdict to the church at Antioch. And we see that when they had read it, verse 31, they rejoiced because of its encouragement. Judas and Silas, who were themselves prophets, encouraged and strengthened the brothers with many words. So they had lots more things to tell them. And after they had spent some time there, those people went back to Jerusalem, and Paul and Barnabas stayed at Antioch teaching and preaching. So that's the story. I think it's important for us not to over-spiritualize what was happening here and just assume that, oh, this was, everybody had good feelings, and, there was no hurt feelings. It was all, like, very spiritual kind of proceeding, okay? Jonathan said something about it being led by the Spirit. We don't read anywhere in this story that they even prayed about this, do we? It doesn't tell us that they did. It doesn't say that they came together with prayer and fasting and searched the Word. It doesn't say any of that. Okay? What does it say they did?
Held their peace.
Well, they did at one point. They didn't all just get together and hold their peace.
Much debate.
There was much debate. There was strong dissension and argument for the 2 different views, right? Okay? So I think we tend to avoid these sorts of things because they're not spiritual. Or we feel like if we're having these feelings, these uneasy feelings inside of us, that it's because of our sinful nature or our unsanctified spirit or something like that. And we tend to avoid these situations when we probably should embrace them. Okay? So, how do we then deal with this conflict inside of us when we're in a conflicting situation, whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's somebody at work, whatever the situation is? How do we deal with this? Because we do know that a lot of these things do lead to broken relationships. They do lead to anger and bitterness and hate and all of those things that we know are sinful. Okay? So then how do we avoid the bad, but not avoid the good that can come from this? I'm going to leave you with a few a few ideas here, and one of the other reasons that I wanted to look at this was to suggest a useful framework of thinking about situations like this. How to think about them, how to deal with that when we find that conflict in ourselves. I'd like to start by basically retelling the message of a Pastor Mark Driscoll from Mars Hill Church, not anymore, but used to be. I heard this message several years ago, and I thought it was kind of interesting. The main points of it stuck with me, and I tend to think of them whenever I find myself in a situation like this. He was talking about fighting well. Okay, he was arguing that we should fight for things that are important, but that we should fight well. So how do we do that? He used the illustration, which some of us probably can't really relate to so much, but professional boxing or fighting, okay? Take what those people do in the ring, completely sanctioned by our culture and our communities or whatever. If those same people would do the same thing out on the street, okay, they would be locked up. It would be a crime. They'd be charged, right? So why is it that in a culture or in a society, we can look at that one thing, one behavior with approval, and on the other hand, we have to sanction strongly and lock somebody up in prison for the exact same behavior? What is the difference from one to the other? And these were the points that he suggested. That first of all, in the one, there are rules. Okay? There are rules of engagement in the fight, in the boxing ring. There are rules that everybody has to follow. Okay? Out on the street, there are no rules. Okay? That's one big difference. The other one is a mutual respect for the fighters for each other in the ring, where on the street, there's no respect for each other. Okay? So he's saying this is an important thing when we're fighting. When we are dissenting and having no strong dispute, there must be a mutual respect for each other. Okay? That's critical. And you have to follow some rules. Okay? Several rules that he suggested is that it's an appropriate context. Okay? That it might be in an organized meeting like was given in this story. It could be in different, but think of the context. Is where you're having this argument, is it in the appropriate context? If your issue is with another person personally, you should probably fight the battle on that level, okay, rather than, just bringing it up in brother's meeting and telling everybody that this person did this, right? Okay? That's probably not the correct context to have the fight in, okay? There's a start time and there's an end time, okay? Everybody knows when the fight starts. We have to know when the fight ends. Okay? And that did happen here in this story. It's a very good rule to follow. You can't keep on rehashing and allowing that disagreement or dissent to turn into bitterness by festering and festering. You have to come to a conclusion and the fight has to end. Okay? So several rules to follow. The other thing that I found to be interesting, M.L. Durkheim was a French researcher. He lived from 1858 to 1917, and he was a sociologist. He studied how individuals and societies, or how groups interact. One of his big studies was he compared suicide rates from many different countries, and he found several interesting trends. One of them was that men have higher suicide rates than women do. Another one was that unmarried men have higher suicide rates than married men, or married people do. And he also found that there was a higher suicide rate among Protestants versus Catholics. So, and he went to describe why that was. But that was kind of the work he did. He did summarize several things, stating that deviance or dissent, dispute, this conflict, is actually beneficial to communities and groups of people. And if you'd like to write these down, these are pretty interesting, I think. And they personally helped me make sense of and deal with the emotion that I have, because a lot of times you have to, what we tend to do is we tend to let the emotion of the situation direct us rather than the issue at hand, you know, or whatever it could be. And our emotions can just take us any old which way, and we don't have any control over that a lot of times. So this helped me to deal with that. Number one benefit of deviance, as he described it, which is just, deviance is just simply someone doing different from what is normally expected and accepted in a group. Okay? Deviance actually clarifies moral boundaries and affirms norms. So we have somebody who's practicing deviant behavior. In our story today was somebody who's practicing or teaching deviant teaching, different from what had been accepted at that point. That actually caused, the benefit of that was that it clarified where the boundary actually was, and it reaffirmed, okay? By going through this process of discussion and dissent, they came to a conclusion. They reaffirmed that no, we don't stand here, we stand here, okay? You can't have that without conflict. It doesn't happen, okay? So good benefit of deviance. So when next time you see somebody practicing deviant behavior, okay, don't hate the person for the way he makes you feel because he's practicing deviant behavior, but look at what benefit can come out of that by, in your own mind, maybe it makes you think, well, is that behavior bad? Is that, like, why do I feel that that behavior is bad? Okay? And it can bring clarity to yourself where the boundaries actually are. The second is that deviance promotes social unity. Okay? And we see that happening here. The deviance was brought out, they discussed it, and in the end it actually brought a stronger unity around what, you know, the rules actually need to be. The third is that deviance promotes social change. Sometimes things need to change. Right? You take, for instance, you know, in our own history, the way we used to treat blacks and the laws that that said that basically blacks were subhuman and didn't deserve the same rights that whites did. It wasn't, that would have never changed unless someone would have stood up and practiced deviant behavior. Okay? It caused a social change which was good. So in our church, the same thing can happen. Some things need to change. We're not as awesome as we think. And, you know, so next time, don't hate the person that you see practicing deviant behavior, but look at how it can actually benefit